This episode of ChatEDU is sponsored in part by the National Center for Next Generation Manufacturing. Liz, how are you?
I'm good. I got a little cold, but I'm doing well.
Were you on airplanes with people?
A lot of airplanes, a lot of traveling. I just got back from ASCD ISTE.
Yeah.
17,000 people in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh my goodness.
Thoughts and prayers to Texas. We know that things are not great over there.
So
it's
bad.
very devastating. But prior to that, I was at ASCD ISTE and I got to do 2 presentations, jumped into a little presentation on Fulbright as well. Met lots of people who knew our podcast. So Mike Lee stopped by.
Oh, cool.
Matt Fuchs came by and said hi and
Neat.
stayed at our session. So a lot of different people, which was really exciting. Got to meet some other authors. A lot of AI. Oh, I stopped by Z-Space. Said hi to our friends at Z-Space. So yeah, got to see lots of people in person that we've just been potting with and talking with.
I love it.
Great.
Very cool. I was only a little jealous. I had some FOMO. I was watching LinkedIn and other places and seeing a lot of cool stuff going on. And we're certainly going to talk about some updates from ISTE ASCD today and actually a little bit next week as well. So, all right, very cool. Liz, let's do a prompt drop.
Okay.
Like we're dropping a new prompt.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not super complicated, but it's interesting. I think you've been playing around with this a little
Yep.
bit. And it's really just making a modification to a prompt. And I asked you to make this modification to go find one of your great prompts about knitting or fiber arts. So just talk us through it. Like what's the prompt and what'd you do?
I sell some of my hand knit goods. And so initially I asked, how should I price my knitted goods? I make hats, scarves, and shawls. And so...
Wait, you didn't give it a role like you are a world-class marketer of knitted goods?
No, I literally just said, how should I price my knitted goods? I make hats, scarves, and shawls.
And you're a co-host on the ChatEDU podcast? Fine. Carry on.
So it basically just immediately gave me answers. So it said, calculate your cost for your materials, add up the costs, then track your time, assign yourself an hourly wage, then use a pricing formula, which is time plus materials plus overhead.
Okay. And so I gave you this like hack. What's the hack?
So the hack was that I added now, I mostly sell knit items. Please ask me clarifying questions until you are certain that you can create an effective pricing guideline for my small business.
Interesting. So same prompt, you just add this little bit that says, please ask me clarifying questions until you're certain, fill in the blank.
Exactly.
Okay.
It asked me all kinds of questions from product categories, typical dimensions, time and labor, material cost, business overhead, sales strategy, shipping and fees. And so I gave it lots of information. I said I did not want to do anything related to an hourly wage because I cannot track my time for knitting or making stuff because I just do
I'm
it.
an artist. I can't be bothered, people, to track my time.
Well, like sometimes I sit and knit for 15 minutes and sometimes 3 hours.
Fully understand.
You know, I don't want to add that into it.
Mm-hmm.
Then it went back and asked me some more questions. So it asked for examples of simple, medium, and complex items in a few different categories: knitted items, embroidered items, quilted items. Wanted some current pricing experience. So then it started asking me more about like what my goals were. So do you want to maximize your profit, cover your costs with pride, or find a balance? What's your long-term vision? Do you want to eventually do this full time, or is it just a steady side income?
Getting to know you.
Right. I just, right now I don't sell online. So it was asking, would I be interested in going that route? Would I eventually, right now I have no overhead. I knit in my house. It doesn't cost me anything.
Yep.
Would I eventually want a store, or will there be overhead? And it then came up with a much more comprehensive pricing tier structure that felt more rational to me. I mean, my items are expensive, but it's because I use high quality materials and they're one of a kind.
But you're an artist.
And I'm an artist. But it did come up with a formula. It made me a spreadsheet. It did. It did a great job.
So the lesson learned here is that if you have an hour to answer the questions that ChatGPT asks you, you're going to get a much better output.
Absolutely.
Okay, neat. So that's all it is. Just ask me clarifying questions after the initial prompt. So try it out. Try it out at home. Let's switch gears to previously on ChatEDU. So this really ought to be its own story, but we're just going to drop it here. And I think we will come back to it as the story matures. But we covered a couple of weeks ago that Notebook LM and Gemini were going to be available to all kids of all ages, including some concerns we had about kids under 13, but nonetheless. And we certainly have been predicting for some time that Google was going to increase the value proposition of Gemini and Notebook and Google Classroom and starting to bring those all together. And in fact, when you were together with how many people?
17,000.
Yeah, it's 17,000 people at ISTE. Google decided to make some announcements. So let's jump in. We're going to share a number of different things here. So Gemini for Education has kind of officially launched. So this means that the premium AI models with higher limits and enterprise-grade data protection and admin controls, all that kind of stuff, are in the free Google Workspace for Education plans for teachers and students. So that basically means no charge if you're already using Docs, Classroom, all that kind of stuff.
That's great.
Okay. So, and it's expanded, right? So it's free across all Workspace editions. And there are 30 new capabilities, including generating vocabulary lists and definitions and examples inside Google Classroom. So, and go take a look at it. Andre, I'll give you a screenshot to put into the feed for Spotify and YouTube. It looks a lot like
Magic School and School AI?
Sure does. Yeah. So you click into this little button that says Gemini inside Google Classroom, and you have all these prompt starters, right?
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, custom gems will continue to roll out, and the ability to share gems with others is on its way. So that's really exciting. So 4 initial templated gems are out there to help educators. One is a study partner, so helping students with comprehension and understanding of course material. A quiz me features where educators can create quizzes to assess student understanding. A brainstorming partner, so helping students and teachers brainstorm ideas, and then a real-world connector, which assists in linking classroom concepts to relevant real-world examples.
Okay. And for folks who don't recall, a gem is kind of like a customized chatbot where you can give it examples and rubrics and specific instructions, and it's kind of steered almost like a room in Magic School. Yes. So imagine that this becomes student-facing. All right, but hold that thought. And then obviously there must be cool stuff going on with Notebook LM.
Yeah, so Notebook LM is now widely used in education, especially those audio overviews, and video overviews are rolling out soon, letting educators and students turn sources into educational videos easily.
It really is. It's such a powerful tool. Obviously, the audio overviews caught everyone's attention. The interactive feature with the audio, I don't know if you've been playing with that when you've been showing folks, but the ability, and I've been starting to ask it like really complex questions, and it gives very nuanced, thoughtful answers based on whatever's in your source documentation. Yeah. So for paid add-ons, so I pay $18 a month, or EdAdvance graciously pays $18 a month for my Pro Gemini account. So for those folks, you're going to actually now pick up VO3. So the Google VO3 video generator, which is pretty much the top world-class tool around video. And a new tool that I haven't been able to play with yet, but it's Gemini and Forms. So as someone who does a lot of like form and survey building, this is really interesting. So, Google Form is pretty damn easy. And even still, I'm just like, I don't want to go through the process of building that form. So now it's basically text to Google Forms. So there's going to be a Gemini in Forms where you can generate assessments and surveys, create them directly in docs or slides or PDFs. And so I believe the way it will work is you're just like prompting, please create a form about, for this survey, for this audience, for this number of questions, and just...
Oh,
that's my sound effect for making the form.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just in a form that we're using, and already I can summarize responses without, it's just there, and you can just quickly summarize responses without having to read through everything. And the survey that I had only had 13 responses, so it wasn't a ton, but it was a good sample because I could easily read the 13 responses and see that the summary was very accurate.
Yep. Yeah, so all interesting stuff. It's going to be done in a, kind of Google's got a whole bunch of kind of ethical and, safe and data privacy controls around this. So we should expect to see that. There's a feature called Double Check that Gemini has where Gemini's basically making sure that it's a fact-based question, that it's kind of checking some kind of knowledge source to make sure that it's there. There's a thing called a vault where admins can check and look at search conversations. I saw a video of it from ISTE. So you can basically be in your Google Classroom and launch a notebook or a gem customized, like I love the way you went through those 4 gems, customized for students. So it shows up in their student-facing Google Classroom. So this is directly, right? We said for some time that Google is not going to just allow Magic School and School AI or Conmigo to own this entire market, right? There's a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of like analytics that they're building in for student assessment and around standards. There's also a feature in Google Classroom that will let them lock kids' screens. So everyone who's using Blue Books right now to do like real-time assessment of kids' knowledge, and we worry about, well, there's not Blue Books when you go off into the workplace. So the ability for in classroom to lock a screen so the kids are in that screen only, and teachers can make sure that they are doing an authentic assessment that's structurally sound right in front of them will be really important as well. So yeah, I mean, Google's bringing a ton of firepower to this process. So it's going to be super interesting to see how the year progresses. I've already been planning like convocation, back to school PDs and keynotes, and all these features aren't there yet. They're going to begin rolling out, actually I think they start in the second. They're going to take about 15 days, but I'm planning that by the time we hit the middle of August that we'll be, kind of doing PD around these tools.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Are you on the edge of your seat?
Yeah, I am.
Well, with that said, I'm Matt Mervis.
And I'm Liz Rade.
And this is ChatEDU, a podcast about AI in education. In today's episode, Viral or Villain. Oh,
I love it.
Is the AI backlash just beginning, Liz? We're going to explore what is essentially explosive use of AI across the entire education sector. At this point, they are basically owning the sector, both for teachers and students. But at the same time, outside of schools, there is a increasing, and inside schools sometimes too, an increasing AI backlash.
But first in the news, we'll look at a unique AI literacy system being implemented in New Jersey and across the United States. Next, we'll dig deeper into what's next for the PISA assessment and some cutting-edge work planned to assess AI and media literacy. Then we'll go beneath the surface as we look at two simultaneous trends happening in and out of schools that appear to be moving in different directions. And of course, we'll end with another Bright Bite. And what an appropriate title, Viral or Villain, because this Friday, the day this episode drops, the big Superman movie comes out.
Oh, nice.
I believe. My brother's a big Superman fan. I'm not.
I thought you were going to say that because you have a virus that you are spreading inside our podcast studio.
Also that.
I'm a little bit of a germaphobe.
A little bit.
So Liz, we love a story where AI is not just a bot, a blinking cursor, right? There's some kind of multimodal aspect where it's sound or, voice or vision. So we got a good one here.
We do.
Tell us about it.
So we're going to talk about Amira. So Newark Public Schools will implement Amira, Amira, which is an AI-powered literacy screener developed by Amira Learning to identify kindergarten through third grade students at risk for reading difficulties under New Jersey's new literacy framework launching this fall. So the district approved a $900,000 2-year contract with Amira, which personalizes interventions by assessing students' reading aloud, tracking fluency, pauses, and other markers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've seen this tool. It's cool because this is really an audio. Kids are reading and it's listening. It's giving feedback. We'll talk more about that. By the way, this is covered in NJ.com and also from Chalkbeat, June 26th, Jesse Gomez, and we will drop that into the show notes. So Amira's pretty widely used, right? Over 2,000 districts. There are certainly concerns about its ability to accurately assess English language learners, especially with complex speech patterns, but experts stress that AI, in this case, is an augmentation, right?
Absolutely.
A theme that hits her all the time, not to replace teacher expertise, and certainly additional research will be needed to validate these types of tools over time. All right, so as Liz shared, Newark's going to deploy Amira as a screener. So can you say just a little bit about what do we mean when we say like a K-3 screener?
Yeah, so it's going to assess students by listening to them read aloud, which will help them identify fluency and potential reading difficulties, and then it can tailor the interventions. So normally this is something that teachers do, is screen their students pretty frequently throughout the year in those K-3 years when they are learning to read, not reading to learn.
Yep.
And so Amira uses machine learning technology to learn from students and adjust to their needs, which is a direct quote from Mark Angel, who's the CEO. Nice.
So the tool is part of a national trend, right, to bring AI into early literacy, but not necessarily, it's not like a kid interacting with a chatbot. It is simply the student is reading and the system is using natural language processing and machine learning to make that assessment. And they've been adopted across different parts of the country, including in the West, in Oklahoma, Colorado, California, and also back in on the East Coast in Georgia, as well as to this pretty big deployment in Newark.
Like you said, there are some concerns about how accurate they can assess English language learners or students with diverse speech patterns, which is significant in a district like Newark that has over 11,000 English language learning students. There are some definite calls for evidence to see how well it works without bias.
Yeah, there's a professor, right, with Yakov Petcher from Florida State University is quoted pretty widely in the piece as an expert, just bringing a critical lens to the need for evidence around this. Not throwing cold water on the strategy, but the idea that we're going to continue to do research. This is kind of cutting edge technology. Experts emphasize that AI literacy tools should support, particularly in the interpretation of results and tailoring instruction. So Petcher says we want to think about how to support and augment systems, but not completely replace teachers, which I think was the point you made before.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, it's such a neat product because teachers can then go and listen to Amira's recordings. They can rescore if needed. There's lots of opportunities for human oversight and helps the AI adapt to diverse student speech profiles. So if you know a kid has a speech impediment and it seems like it's impacting the scores it's getting, the teacher can go in and, reassess and rescore. So the state's working group on literacy does recommend human checks to prevent misidentification due to these AI limitations, but it's great.
And if I recall correctly, Amira as a system does more than these screenings, right? I think there was a whole intervention model. There's a really, I can't remember the name of the avatar, but there's kind of this cute avatar that will interact with students, but it's mostly an audio interaction. The student's speaking, the system is listening, it's giving feedback, it's providing coaching. So we just like the idea that this is a voice application, basically a voice literacy based application. And
not meant to replace human teachers teaching kids how to read.
Yeah, perfect.
It can supplement, but they're very clear that it is not like hand this to your K-3 students and they'll all be learning to read. It's,
right.
Definitely just a supplement.
Yep, perfect. All right, so here's a second interesting application of AI in assessment, kind of diversifying what this looks like. Now, for older students, this is from the OECD, which is an acronym, Liz, that I don't remember.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So it's an international organization.
So good. So we've talked about the OECD of late because they were one of the co-authors, along with code.org, of the new Teach AI Literacy Framework, which you can find at teachai.org/AI literacy. Because you remember acronyms and I remember URLs.
Exactly.
We're a dream team, sister. All right. So this was published on the OECD webpage just this last week. It is about the 2029 PISA Media and Artificial Intelligence Literacy, which is another acronym, MAIL.
Yeah.
All right, so give us an intro here, Dr. Rade.
Okay, so this assessment will evaluate whether students globally can engage critically and responsibly in an AI-mediated digital world. So this responds to the rising need to assess competencies in media literacy, ethical AI use, and critical evaluation of digital content as generative AI and online platforms reshape learning and participation. So just reminder, the PISA is given every 3 years, so that means 2029, 876. So 2026, it will be given. And I think that we reported that in that version, that kids are going to have some access to AI to use in the assessments. So this won't be for the next PISA that's given. It's for the one after that.
Yeah, but it's bumping up the game, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you can go back. I'll dig out what that episode was where we covered PISA, I think.
We've covered it a couple of times.
This may be the third time, right? Because they're doing interesting things around trying to assess these skills. It's funny, we have a TikTok up that right now that's gotten a lot of comments. It's been sort of fun. I basically asked you to ask ChatGPT what are the 8 most important skills for the next 10, 15 years, and you describe what they are. And then you ask, what are the assessments that might match those skills? And they're unsurprising. They're OECD and the World Economic Forum style skills, learning to learn, problem solving, critical thinking, leaning into the human skills, et cetera, but shockingly missing from those 8 skills and the 8 assessments is the 5-paragraph essay. So, but here's an example where more contemporary assessments might measure more contemporary skills that are needed. So the assessments will basically use realistic simulations of social media, search engines, generative AI tools. The search engine thing's interesting because it's moving so fast. They're probably like, oh, we got to rethink that. Oh, we got to rethink that.
Right.
So they're going to create these simulations about how students might apply these skills in practice so that education systems have evidence to guide policy and curriculum. So the first analytical framework will be available in 2025. This December, which is really exciting. So it's not, it's always like a little annoying when people come out with say like, here's a framework. Like, I mean, it's not annoying. God bless Teach AI and OECD and code.org. It's very helpful to have it. It's also very helpful to have exemplars and scaffolds and assessments, right? So we're going to have a framework for that. All right, so give us a little bit more flavor here.
Yeah, so there will be a domain focused on media and artificial intelligence literacy to measure student readiness for an AI-mediated world.
Cool.
So basically, it's going to shed light on whether or not young students have had opportunities to learn and think about and be critical in a world where, production, participation, social networking are increasingly mediated by these digital and AI tools. And I mean, it's hard. When I, scroll through any one of the social media feeds, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not.
It's going to be really interesting to see how do they assess students' ability to do that critical thinking and critical evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, the plan is to immerse students in this realistic digital context and, the search engines, the social media, and evaluate how they apply critical literacy and ethical reasoning in practice. Maybe it's going to be mock internet searches to have them, evaluate the source credibility, maybe scrolling through simulated social media feeds with, mixed quality posts and looking for misinformation or biased content, maybe interacting with generative AI chatbots to analyze output for accuracy, some ethical decision points as to whether to share unverified AI content or respond to deepfakes. I mean, this is all exactly what adults are doing or not doing in social media, and the things that are just getting perpetuated because people are sharing false information because they're not thinking critically about it. So the hope is that young people will be a little more critical in what they consume and then share. But I'm also thinking that we're sitting here in July of 2025. This is an assessment for, the spring-ish of 2029. Like, how different could it be even then? Like 4 years ago, TikTok wasn't a thing, right? So, and now it's the thing. So I just can't even imagine how you start planning for an assessment 4 years from now, much less 4 months from now.
Where clearly by then there will be a hologram that will bounce off of your iPhone.
Yes, I know. And
on your
Nikola
table.
Tesla will be teaching you all about.
Why do you have such derision around that concept?
I don't know. I just don't buy the hologram is popping off your desk yet.
Well, go look at your friends that you visited with C-Space. I mean,
I know, that is very true.
It is basically happening.
Yes.
It's just an application of it in terms of making it generative. So I could say, hey, I want to see this particular thing happen. And then in moments it can. I love this, though. I think you're right. Going to be really tough to track. Also, there's a little bit of a closed box here, right? Because only certain people participate in this assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty international, but I don't know how exactly people are chosen. But it's definitely, they try to make it a representative sample of the world and of each country. This is the same assessment that, Finland flew to the top of in the mid-2010s. This is an assessment that people really do use and refer to very commonly. So it's a very well-known and highly regarded assessment. So it's going to have influence and it's going to have impact because people do take this assessment very seriously.
Yeah, I like the way you were describing all the different strategies that they're going to use. So the interacting with the chatbots and going through the simulated social media feeds. I hope there's going to be like a simulated TikTok that has Italian brain rot. And they ask you when it goes, Balaccini, Ababini, it asks you to assess whether or not it's real and what the Italian is.
Yeah.
So this aligns, as we said at the top, with these international efforts, including the European Union's OECD AI literacy framework. So there's some grounding around this. And I like that there is also going to be a framework for the assessment that they launch out in 2025. So to your point, it won't roll out to 2029, but we're going to see this kind of framework for how they're going to do that in just a few more months.
Yeah, and that'll give educators some lead time to adjust curricula and interventions so that they can not teach to the test, but start exposing students to this kind of stuff because it will be assessed. So that's great. I mean, we should come back to this in December, and I'm sure we will, to start looking at what that framework looks like. And this is another one of those things where I think schools are going to struggle with who owns it. So who teaches this AI literacy? Because everyone should be, but when everyone owns it, no one owns it. So I think there'll be some questions about, does this go in a computer science class, which it shouldn't be just for computer science? Does it go in an English class or where does it fit?
Yeah. Although we had that in the early days of the internet, right? It's like, well, who's going to teach internet literacy? But when you have a general purpose technology that is as all consuming as something like the internet was or is, and clearly what generative AI will be, hopefully those intersections are everywhere. But to your point, right, even social media literacy, we at Skills 21 for several years now have had a social media literacy program that we're super proud of called the Social Balance, which you can find, by the way, at skills21.org/social-balance. This is a really nice curriculum. It's rooted around STEM and thinking about what are the STEM implications of
right. We do a lot about the psychology of the brain development and the math and the algorithm. So it's not just like, don't do this. It is not a finger wagging, don't go on social media course. It's really about how it all works.
Right. What kind of skills you can develop to be balanced in your use as a young person or frankly as an adult. But that program, even though it has STEM hooks, math hooks, health hooks, it's still tricky for schools to figure out exactly where they want to put it. And that may be the same thing. I think you make an excellent point. But we will come back to this. This has been fun to track, and really kudos to the folks at the OECD for making this a priority, both in terms of what do kids need to know and be able to do, but also how will we measure it.
Hi, I'm Cam Audia, the executive producer of ChatEDU. As we look to the next academic year, many schools are exploring how to implement AI literacy efforts for students. Building on the success of our AI teacher micro-credential, EdAdvance, and ChatEDU, are launching a middle and high school student AI literacy program. This cutting-edge curriculum is hosted on our FERPA-compliant AI platform and will help students develop the knowledge and skills they'll need to navigate AI now and into the future. To learn more, email Matt and Liz at chatedu@edadvance.org.
All right, Matt, now it's time to go beneath the surface and talk about another story that may be about viruses or viral things and villains.
You're into this viruses and viral things, right?
I like the title this week.
Yeah, I did the best I could.
You always do.
Me and ChatGPT. All right, so two stories that are really demonstrating just the absolute, every sector is a little bit different. You can look at finance and retail and civil society and government and national security. I mean, everybody's a little bit different in terms of the depth in which AI has had an impact on that field. But clearly, education was, implicated in the earliest days of ChatGPT because students realized that it could do some work for them as well as be a great tutor, right? There's the line. And then 2 days later, the teachers realized it could do the same thing. So the adoption in schools has been essentially exponential. It's been a hockey puck. So we're seeing lots and lots of adoption across schools as well as lots of concerns. We talk about them all the time.
Been a hockey puck? What does that mean?
Oh, sorry. It's been a hockey stick.
Oh. Okay.
It's been a hockey stick where the growth curve just goes up,
like
up,
a hockey
up. Exactly.
Stick. Got it.
Yeah. All right. So two stories here. So the first from the Walton Family Foundation. We covered this survey last year. And so we're covering the next year's survey in June 2025. This is the Gallup in partnership with the Walton Family Foundation. Teach for Tomorrow, unlocking 6 weeks a year with AI. And essentially coming to the conclusion that teachers are saving lots of time. I think we covered a similar study maybe 3-4 months ago. All right, so kick us off, Dr. Rade.
Yeah, so this report investigates how K-12 teachers are adopting generative AI tools, revealing significant time savings and instructional quality improvements for those who are using AI regularly. So teachers using AI regularly are saving nearly 6 weeks per school year, which they are actually reinvesting in providing student feedback, creating more personalized lessons, and achieving better work-life balance.
I don't know how I'd love to know if they occasionally just kick back and had a cafe latte too or something.
Maybe they're all knitting some more.
Okay. And so quantify this, how much time per week do we get to the 6 weeks over the year?
Yeah, as I was driving this morning, I was thinking about the time saving. So teachers using AI weekly say that they are saving 5.9 hours per week. So I was thinking, okay, so that's 6 hours a day. So it's basically they're saving the equivalent of almost a whole workday each week.
Which does seem aggressive, I have to say, but carry on.
Yeah, but if you total that over the entire school year, it's the equivalent to nearly 6 weeks per school year, right? So like 30 days.
I think it's important to pause here for a second. You said you were driving to work. Were you driving the speed limit?
I was driving the speed limit.
Fantastic.
A little bit under, in fact. I'm a little pedal shy right now.
As well you should be. Carry on.
But the good news is, it's all good news. They are also reinvesting that time in meaningful instructional work. So they're saving 5.9 hours per week on average. So the qualitative data from the survey shows that the teachers are using the time with AI on things like providing more nuanced student feedback, creating individualized lessons, writing emails to parents, which I find odd because I feel like that would be a task that they would be offloading to the AI. And this one is really important, getting home to their families at a more reasonable time.
There you go. See, I was focused on them having a latte and they just needed to get home, which makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Now, teachers are reporting higher quality work, particularly in modifying materials, generating insights, and grading. Now, we've covered all of these topics quite a bit. There was a really neat study that we covered maybe a month or so ago about how, stock tools, including ChatGPT, but also Magic School sometimes would not create high quality lessons. But I like the idea that they're sometimes modifying existing materials. That's a prompt that you and I do quite a bit. So from the report, they quote, applying AI tools to their classroom work not only saves teachers time, but in many cases improves quality. Among teachers who use AI tools for these tasks, they see 64% say they see better quality materials that they modify to meet students' needs. So that makes a ton of sense, right? We see a lot of potential in these AI systems to do differentiation, modification of text. They see higher quality insights around student learning and achievement, which makes sense here too. Like as long as you're being careful not to go putting spreadsheets of data into ChatGPT, but certainly the systems can gain good insights. And then 57% see a quality of their student feedback in grading. And, Liz and I have talked a good bit, and we have some anxiety about the grading piece, right? Excellent for feedback when it's the only view, when it's the AI doing the grading by itself without, another set of eyes, specifically the teacher's eyes. There's some real risks there just because of the bias in these models when they are autonomously doing grading by themselves. So what else we got? Teachers also feeling more optimistic about the potential.
Yeah, teachers who use AI are more likely to be optimistic about the impacts on AI on student outcomes. So 48% of weekly AI users think AI will increase student engagement compared with 25% of non-users.
The report also found that schools that have AI policies see greater benefits, which is not a big surprise to me. We're often interviewed by, either academics or folks in the press who are asking us about what we're seeing on the ground. And I have just a list in my head of different indicators of maturity. So when I think about, hey, how's the school doing? A lot of stuff pops up. It could be, do they have policy? Do they have an AI planning team? Do they do professional learning? Has the board been engaged? Are parents engaged? A really nice one that I think I see is almost like, this is not a formal rubric, but it's just like what's in my head about what I see. And is there like a student team, like a student AI squad or a student leadership team or a student club? So we look for all these different pieces, but policy and student-facing guidelines is a big piece. And so it's not a surprise that schools that have invested in things like guidelines are also investing in other things like professional learning or student-facing AI pilots or more fully deployed. So, that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, I did share multiple times over the last few weeks just the examples of policies that we have on our webpage because you've said it a lot of times that, you have to think about some sort of guidelines now, especially as deepfakes become more and more, prevalent unfortunately for young kids. So some sort of guidelines need to be in place starting this school year. So we strongly encourage that. And we do have examples at our website, skills21.org/resources? No.
Close.
/AI/resources.
Also close, but not. Oh, no, you're right. I'm sorry.
I got it.
You did get it.
Skills21.org/AI/resources.
Excellent.
I know what I'm talking about.
We've worked together for too long. All right. So, we'll wrap this up. Certainly, teachers see a lot of benefit for AI to improve accessibility in student materials, reduce workload. But then you got the student side. So, yes, I think we can conclusively say that AI has taken teacher productivity by storm. There are critical questions to ask. There are things that we need to be thoughtful about how teachers do this. There are new tools all the time. But generally, as is in the case in most industries, folks have found benefits that are both about time and also quality. All right. Great. Fantastic. Now, on the kid side,
Yeah.
they've also, this is eaten students' world, right? So we're now covering this piece from the New York Post, but in fairness, it showed up lots of different places. But, the headline is 97% of Gen Z students are using AI to write essays, do homework, and get into college. And again, we're not going to perseverate on this point about, is it brain rot? Is it tutoring? For the purposes of today's analysis, they're using it in lots of ways, some highly productive, some probably counterproductive, right?
Exactly. I mean, this was a Scholarship Owl survey of 12,000 students, and they found 97% of Gen Z users using AI for schoolwork, including more than 20% using it for college essays before they enroll. But, they're using these tools for all kinds of different things, essays, homework, studying, test prep. But it, of course, sparks debates over learning loss, admissions integrity, and oh no, the future of essays in college applications.
You can tell we're so over this topic. The point here that we really wanted to raise is that kids are universally using these tools, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's true of, this is Gen Z study, but I think it's true of Gen Alpha. What's the little ones now? Gen Beta? I don't know.
Matt,
We're naming these before they're even born.
Yeah, just last weekend, I have my cousin's children are all growing up. I call them my nieces, but they're not technically my nieces, whatever. But one of them emailed me and said, "Can you read my essay for?" She's applying to physician's assistant school,
Yep.
and she sent it to me, and it was a good essay. But in her first paragraph, she had a long M dash, and I called it out right away, and I said, "Did you use AI to write this sentence because the M dash gives it away?" And she wrote back and she goes, "No, Erin, her older sister, told me to put that in there, and I told her it was going to look like it was AI." And I said, "Take it out. I'm sorry. I know that you wrote it now, but it's going to look like a tell."
Yeah, there's so many people who have loved using the M dash in their authentic original writing.
Yeah.
But it's just.
I know. I just took it out of Brenna's essay.
ChatGPT just killed the M dash as a literary function.
Yeah.
So sad.
I know. But immediately I was like, oh, it sounds AI generated.
Yeah. All right. So to that point, right, we're covering a story here from Wired. So, the foil, the viral and villain foil here is that in our sector, in higher ed and in K-12, both for students and teachers, AI has essentially gobbled up the space, right? We have all sorts of thoughtful conversations we have to have about what does school mean? What does learning mean? What does it look like? But we can say universally that adoption is very, very, very high. Now, at the same time, though, in the broader community, there's some real pushback that's starting to kind of raise, and we want to kind of kick through that right here and then think about what do schools do. So this is from Wired Magazine, June 28th, Reese Rogers. The AI backlash keeps growing stronger. So as generative AI tools proliferate, a robust backlash is intensifying across the workforce, creative industries, education, and local communities.
What started out as this fascination with ChatGPT has turned into some actual organized resistance because there are these concerns about automation replacing workers, copyright violations, environmental harms from the AI infrastructure, and erosion of genuine learning, and the concerns about mental health. So, this is something, even my mom just this weekend was like, "I just saw that AI is taking all the jobs." I'm like, "It's not taking all the jobs, Mom. Yes, it's going to change the way jobs are and blah, blah, blah." But she just sees the big headlines that the bottom rung of the ladder is missing.
Well, I think that's why we wanted to cover the story, is that because in schools, right, I think you can compare education to any other sector. The adoption is higher among all groups, all stakeholder groups. But at the same time, outside of our school walls, right, there's some, and our universities, there's some really important backlash going on. It's not like it's not happening inside too, but we just have to have some sensitivity about it. All right, so let's jump in. So to Kitty's point, Kittles, right? Kittles, what's her
Kittles and Chuckles.
Oh my God, seriously?
No, that's what my brother wants his children to call my parents.
Sorry, Andre, I'm banging my head against the microphone. So one of the first, big flashpoints, and we covered on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, was the Duolingo AI first thing. And they're one of several companies, including Klarna, Shopify. I mean, a number of these companies have said we're going to be AI first, but Duolingo caused a freak out. So users deleted the app. They broke their streaks. Some of them had like 3-year-long streaks working with Duolingo. And some of it was because when the CEO, Louis von Ahn, said we're going to be AI first, that meant that workers were going to be displaced. And so, from the story, a guy named Brian Merchant is quoted saying that workers are more intuitive than a lot of the pundit class give them credit for. They knew that this was a naked attempt to get rid of people. The next major shift in public opinion will likely occur when broad swaths of workers feel threatened, and they will organize a response. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Then we also have artists, right, which we've discussed a little bit in the pod already.
Yeah, I mean, they are on the front lines of AI resistance. They are, concerned about copyright issues, the scraping of their creative works for AI training, and there's been litigation that has intensified as generative AI expands. And so Bryant Merchant here said, I think there is a new sort of ambient animosity towards AI systems. AI companies have speed-run the Silicon Valley trajectory. And so this really matters because educators using AI for content generation do need to consider copyright, intellectual property, and trust in the workflows.
So the copyright issue, right, is that as these AI systems learn, quote unquote, they were trained on the work of authors and artists and comics and photographers and painters and movie makers and musicians and all that kind of stuff. At the same time that the Wired story dropped, there were 2 major watershed legal cases that were announced. And we didn't cover them on the podcast, but I'll share them quickly here. So Anthropic basically won in court. So there was deemed that when Anthropic took a bunch of publicly available stuff that the system learned, the same way that you and I read a book in order to learn, but they didn't use it to be able to spit it back out verbatim, word for word. So that falls as fair use, which means that Anthropic was able to do that. Now, interestingly, in the Anthropic case, they also stole a whole ton of books, and they're probably going to be fined hundreds of millions of dollars for that. So it was a mixed ruling, but the fair use part winds up being more important. And then there was an existing case that Meta had that the court settled the next day, because as soon as the Anthropic case was settled or the precedent was established, so I do worry that the artist claim around copyright is all going to fall. Now, the one that's still there is the New York Times, which is in litigation with OpenAI and Microsoft, because their argument is that when they trained on the Times, you could say, hey, spit back out this article that this New York Times author wrote, Kevin Roose wrote about, him falling in love with Sydney or Sydney falling in love with him. And it did seem to spit back word for word the article. And so that is the distinction. But this wall of resistance, I think, is starting to fall. Now, one that's not falling, and it's clearly the one that you and I hear probably more than anything else, is the energy use and the impact on the environment, right?
Yeah. In Memphis, residents are protesting Elon Musk's XAI methane-powered data center because it really spotlights how AI infrastructure burdens marginalized communities. So Alex Hanna said, data centers are being located in these really poor areas that tend to be more heavily Black and brown. Locals have not just been fighting back online, but have also been organizing even more in person to protect their communities from environmental pollution. And this is something we hear from kids all the time. They are very aware of it.
Kids, younger teachers.
Yeah, adults. Yeah. I mean, we hear it from a lot, but I'm always energized by the students understanding the environmental impacts.
Yeah, and Liz and I aren't climate scientists, but it's hard to see the tragedy in Texas in this last week. I mean, we know that we're getting these like high volume rain events and also these more explosive thunderstorms and tornadoes and hurricanes. There's a tropical depression in the Gulf right now. I mean, clearly it's not as if AI is causing these things, but the energy demands, I mean, Google themselves have admitted that they were pretty close on target, both Google and Microsoft, to becoming carbon neutral. And now they've totally blown past that. So the energy demands that the AI data centers are requiring are significant. And so it's interesting to see this kind of backlash forming in, again, not just, as you said, these like online,
sign a petition.
Yeah, sign a petition. These are real people organizing around this content. I mean, certainly We see other stuff that's a little bit ephemeral, like when people say AI slop, they just, the trolls come out. So if someone puts up something on it, you see this on LinkedIn, like there's a lot of, thoughtful posts that will go up and someone will use an image that was generated in ChatGPT or in Midjourney. And then all of a sudden there's like a whole nother thing about how lazy are you and the use of it. So certainly in social spaces where people feel comfortable to be cantankerous.
Oh, I love that word.
A-holes. I don't think we've ever said that on the podcast, that there's a lot of trolling, a lot of animosity. So certainly there's a lot of negativity that's coming out around that. As you said, and as Kitty is concerned, kittles and chuckles, that there's a lot of mental health impacts, right? So anything else you want to add there?
Parents are definitely concerned about AI impacting their mental health. I was listening to Hard Fork on the way in, and they said that, one of them said that they were very concerned about students having so much connection to an AI chatbot and feeling that the chatbot was the best friend that they had or the best, most valuable interactions that they were having, and really concerned about the lack of social, actual human friends and human interactions. And that really, really concerns me. We covered the story about...
They're going to have Barbie.
I was just going to say, we covered the story about Mattel, wanting to put AI in toys, and that just... No, please don't. Please keep having in-person groups, play groups. Go to the park.
Yeah, and text threads. I mean, that's part of it. I continue to be hopeful that this is an adult problem. I think kids really do want social connections. Too many of them are online, but nonetheless want social connections. I worry that as people, because they're just social animals, they're in social environments in schools, right? There's always the outlier, groups of kids that have a hard time connecting with other kids, and there's a real risk there. They fall in love with chatbots. There's been really tragic outcomes. But in general, adults are more lonely than kids, and they may wind up being a little bit more susceptible, but certainly that's a case. The story did a quick hit on the job implications, but I do wonder if that's where we're going to see. I mean, these are all important pieces of backlash, and I think schools have to think about them, because as schools rapidly adopt these technologies, though trying to bring a critical lens to it, what is happening outside of schools is certainly a bit of a backlash. And I wonder if the job market's going to be the one that becomes the most impactful over the next several months. I listened to this I should read, but I translate it into audio and I listen on my way into work. A really good daily newsletter called The Neuron. And so from The Neuron this morning, July 7th, it said, so the job market is officially weird, really weird. As Axios reported, June brought 147,000 new jobs, but 85% of them, interesting to us, right, came from education and healthcare. Everyone else, crickets. So law, finance, retail, civil sector, government, all of it. So we're living in what economists call a frozen job market, which I thought was really interesting. So companies won't fire you. Good for us, Dr. Ratty.
Yeah, we're good.
But they're not going to hire you either, right?
Interesting.
So, you've got this void where all these kids aren't getting hired. And they don't blame it solely on AI. They say the economy, the post-pandemic realities, certainly the tariffs and companies not knowing what's going on. But a chunk of it is AI. And so I wonder if that backlash that we'll see as we move into the fall of the next school year becomes more of a thing. And can schools do something thoughtful? So if a school educated a kid who is now 22 or 21 and they're living at home, what can schools do to support those students in terms of workforce development, reskilling, how to crack into the labor market? I don't know. These are a lot of questions that are kind of tricky. So what do we think that schools should do in this world where there's, widespread adoption among all stakeholder groups, but at the same time, there's kind of this backlash growing outside of schools?
I guess we have to focus on practical school leader implications. So, we're already seeing that teachers are seeing real instructional value and workload reduction when AI is used intentionally. So this is important. It's an important counterweight to the fear-based narratives. But we also see that public sentiment is shifting and blind optimism is going to backfire. So we need to pair adoption with policy and professional learning and community dialogue to avoid creating inequities or backlash within schools. And we do have to think about the emerging job crisis. I mean, I feel like this is what was happening also when I was getting out of college in the early 2000s.
Yep.
That so many college grads were not able to get jobs that were aligned with how much debt they had and the salaries that they needed. And I think sometimes that increases the number of people that go to grad school, right?
Sure.
Because they don't have jobs, they'll just go to grad school. But I think we're seeing a lot of questions about what's the value of that. So now you're going to have even more debt and a higher degree, but where you still need to enter the job market at some point. So there's, I think that it's all cyclical, right? Like there are times when there's lots of, it's harder to get a job, and then times where there's lots of job growth. And I think we're going to see both, right?
It's a good tease because actually next week, I don't know if it'll be the Beneath the Surface, but we're definitely covering a story next week. I think the title is like, what are the 7 undergraduate majors that are perfect for this moment of AI that we're living in? So
I'm guessing it's not Spanish and French.
Well, it's interesting because we've said before, like language translation would be toast, or medical scribes, or people that kind of move data around in HR functions. But there have been real world growth. That's a tricky thing about all these trends, is that as you unpack them with more clarity, like one week we covered the job apocalypse that was predicted by Dario Amodei, and the next week we covered a story from PricewaterhouseCoopers that showed it, as they looked at hundreds of thousands of open positions, that there is hiring going on across the economy. But when the day's done and you back away from it, I will do an activity pretty regularly where I ask people if they've got like a young adult living with them at home, and the hands are pretty substantial.
Including yours.
Yeah, including mine. And some of it, like my kid's got a job, but just the cost of housing is very, very expensive. And certainly for some of them, it is also, they're burdened by college debt. The cost of housing is very expensive, and the job market is frozen at this point. So I think, yes, I like the way you characterized it. Schools are going to have to be realistic, balanced. I mean, certainly as we do professional learning, we spend a good chunk of time talking about the real world risks and just being real. There are lots of opportunities here, but there are also concerns. And I think just being transparent and candid about them. We've both been involved in doing a number of like community events. These could be evening events at schools. And there is a benefit there too in pointing to the opportunities, the benefits to teachers, what the benefits to kids can look like, but also just being very real about the concerns and the limitations therein, because everything's nuanced. Even the energy thing's nuanced, right? Google just bought a bunch of kilowatt energy from a company called Commonwealth Fusion. So they are bringing a fusion reactor online, which is not actually really a thing yet, but they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a potential fusion reactor, which would be, clean energy. And we've covered stories where kids at Princeton have helped figure out how to stabilize plasma so that nuclear fusion could be more realistic. Oh, I'm drowning in the questions. But yeah, we did want to, do the viral and villain piece this week because it is important for schools to be able to be thoughtful about how to, know what the backlash looks like and how to navigate it in a productive and healthy way, which is a perfect segment, Dr. Ratty, let's have a bright bite. Can we have a little bright bite here?
Please, let's have a bright bite. And bright bites are when we try to cover stories of AI doing great things in all sorts of fields.
Okay, so this one is the path to medical superintelligence. This is from the Microsoft blog. We've covered a few stories like this, but I want to take a different angle here. So there's been a number of studies where AI has been more effective at doing diagnoses than human doctors, right? Which is not a shocker, that they got all the data. They can make a look at all the analytical patterns. Like, I think we feel comfortable about this one. Here, though, part of the theme was around the potential savings. So Microsoft's AI Diagnostic Orchestrator, which is MAIDXO, diagnosed 85% of complex New England Journal of Medicine cases 4 times higher than physicians, right? While lowering diagnostic testing cost. Specifically, MAIDXO reached accurate diagnoses with fewer targeted tests, avoiding excessive and unnecessary diagnostics that contribute to waste in healthcare spending. So this is like Dr. House MD stuff, right? You've got a very complicated diagnoses to make here. So very often doctors wind up doing lots of tests, and sometimes those tests aren't effective. So here they basically hit this thing at an 85% rate for accuracy in diagnoses, and the doctors were like in the 20s.
Yeah. So the study notes up to 25% of the nearly 20% of U.S. GDP spent on healthcare is wasted. And that's often due to unnecessary tests that do not improve outcomes. So MAI DxO's cost-aware design demonstrated higher accuracy at lower test costs than physicians or standalone AI models. So this suggests that AI could significantly reduce wasteful spending while improving care if it is validated clinically.
Yeah, really, really neat stuff. Did you watch House?
Loved House.
Yeah.
I mean, the cases were crazy, but it was kind of a matter of throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Then, testing for all these really random things that are expensive tests because they're not run frequently, and hoping that something shows up. And if we could narrow the scope of which things we're throwing at the wall to stick, it's going to obviously save lots of money, hopefully time, hopefully improve outcomes. So it's great.
Yeah, my only suggestion is I think they ought to have renamed MAI DxO to just House.
I mean, maybe.
Microsoft House, saving you money. All right, Dr. Addy, good to be back with you. Welcome home from, was it pretty damn hot down there?
It wasn't nearly as hot as I was fearing.
Huh.
So that was good.
Okay.
So it was, it was a good time.
Right. Well, we're glad to have you back here in sunny New England, and we'll see you again next week. I think we're together for at least 3 weeks in a row.
I can't wait.
But we're grateful to Jonathan for jumping into the chair in the meantime.
That's
It
right.
is now, he did this very well, by the way, right on cue. So it's now time to
roll the credits.
As always, we'd love to hear what you think. So please let us know at ChatEDU@edadvance.org. That's EDADVANCE.org. And also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are using. ChatEDU is brought to you by EdAdvance, the nonprofit regional education service center in Litchfield, Connecticut. This episode of ChatEDU is sponsored by the National Center for Next Generation Manufacturing. ChatEDU is recorded, edited, and produced by Andre Angelo and Justin Pasco, whose dedication and expertise bring our discussions to life. ChatEDU's executive producer is the multi-talented rock star Cameron Audia. Additionally, we are grateful for the support of our colleague Gary Robinson, and we appreciate his time and talents. And of course, a big ChatEDU shout out to our fearless leader and executive director, Jonathan Costa, for inspiring the pod. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey exploring the thoughtful and innovative integration of AI in education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Costa, and I am the Executive Director at EdAdvance, and I want you to know how much we appreciate our listeners. If you enjoyed the podcast, feel free to explore EdAdvance's other AI services, which include customized professional learning of all kinds, conferences, and our micro-credential co-sponsored by the Southern Connecticut State University Office of Workforce and Lifelong Learning. Just visit skills21.org/AI to learn more. That's all for now, and thank you again for listening to ChatEDU.